In this lesson, we're going to be looking in a bit more detail at the acronym CITE and looking at how you use that when dealing with 19th century prose fiction. So CITE is all about seeing the big picture with these 19th century prose extracts. The acronym CITE is used to refer to the four big elements that make up prose fiction, and those elements are the setting, so the where and the when. Where do the events take place? When, in terms of the time of year, the time of day, and also the physical locations. The I stands for the ideas, and these are the ideas and the perspectives of the writer rather than the characters in there. And to understand the ideas and perspectives, you have to do a bit of digging, you have to use inference, you have to interpret those and get to those through looking at the way that the writer presents their settings, their events and their characters. The T stands for the themes. We've addressed themes in an earlier lesson. So themes are the big issues that the writer is dealing with through their prose fiction. These tend to be related to sort of the hot topics of the day, things like religion, things like scientific developments, things like the role of women, those big things that we dealt with in a previous lesson. The E stands for events, which at a very basic level is just what happens, what actually happens or what is described within that particular text. CITE is a really useful way to unlock prose fiction when you're first reading the extract, because it gets you looking at the text as a whole. So you're thinking about what's going on, what's the theme, where is it set, what ideas is the writer trying to convey to us. But it is also the thing you need to use when you are answering question 4 on the exam paper, because question 4 will give you one element of CITE and you will be asked to evaluate how effectively that has been conveyed in the extract. To do that, you will also need to consider the other 3 elements, because they are all connected, they are all dependent on each other in terms of creating meaning within any prose fiction extract. So let's think in a bit more detail then about each element in turn. So the settings. Many 19th century writers use settings symbolically because there are lots of things that it was very difficult to write about directly in the 19th century. And these tended to be the things linked to the themes within these texts. So things like religion, things like the nature of mankind, certainly anything to do with sex or sexuality was very difficult to write about. And if you're dealing with the role of women, you know, there's an element of sexual power that comes into play in that. So what happened was that writers used settings symbolically, and a really popular technique was something called pathetic fallacy. This is where elements of nature, so for example a landscape, the weather, whatever it might be, are used to symbolise aspects of a character's personality or their emotional state, or maybe to suggest a mood or an atmosphere. Settings can also be used, as well as conveying character and atmosphere, to convey to us significant ideas and themes that the writer wants to address. So in the extract that you have a passage from Tess of the d'Urbervilles. It comes from near the end of the novel, and the setting for that is Stonehenge. Now Tess and her husband Angel Clare have ended up there because Tess has finally killed Alec d'Urberville, the man that sexually assaulted her and was the father of her illegitimate child. She has fled. She's told Angel about this, and they've stopped to rest at Stonehenge. Tess is eventually arrested at Stonehenge, and the use of Stonehenge as a setting is significant because it's used to suggest she's a sacrificial victim. There's an implication that she is innocent. She's as innocent as those that the pagans sacrificed, and that her eventual and inevitable execution for killing Alec is as barbaric as the pagan practice of human sacrifice that used to take place at Stonehenge. Now later in this lesson we'll look in detail at the text extract itself and look at how those ideas are conveyed to us through the different parts of that extract. So settings tend to be very symbolic, and you always need to assume that there's more to a setting than just a simple backdrop for the events that are unfolding. We then come on to the I, which stands for ideas. Now, as I said, this refers to the writer's ideas and perspectives about what they're writing. And to get to those, we have to use inference. We have to interpret. And again, this is where our contextual knowledge comes in really useful, because although we're not going to be making any direct comment about issues of context, we need to understand the context of these 19th century prose fictions to be able to see the ideas that the writer is conveying to us. Because if we don't understand the context, we can't get inside the mind of the reader, and we don't know what the writer, and we don't know why they're writing about those particular things in the ways that they are. So the way that we infer the writer's ideas and perspectives by looking at how they are presenting the events, the characters, how their settings are symbolic, and what themes they are addressing. We need to remember that writers choose their settings, their themes and their events deliberately. Every single thing that you read in a piece of 19th century prose fiction is there deliberately. It has been thought about, and it is there to either present particular ideas, to explore particular issues, and to further the theme that the writer is dealing with at that time. The settings, the themes and the events of 19th century prose fiction are generally symbolic of things that can't be addressed openly. There are hidden meanings within all of these texts, and those hidden meanings are the things that relate to the writer's ideas and perspectives. Therefore, you always need to assume that there are deeper hidden meanings, and it is your job to get at those by using this acronym CITE and thinking about how the setting is symbolic, what ideas are being conveyed, what events are taking place, what themes are being addressed. Okay. So if we go on to themes, as we've seen in an earlier lesson, 19th century prose texts have common themes, things like religion, the role of women, the plight of the poor. To be able to comment effectively on those, you do need to understand the social, historical and political context, but it is very important when you're answering question 4 that you do not make any direct or obvious comment about context. So you mustn't say, well, this text was written in 1840, that was the hungry 40s, and so when the characters do this, the writer is showing us what life was like for people in the 1840s, because that then becomes more of a sociology essay or a history essay rather than an analytical, evaluative, literary essay. If you are asked to deal with a theme for question 4, that theme will be specified in the wording of the question. The question will always contain the phrase, there is an attempt to show, and that is the phrase that comes before the element of sight you have to deal with. So if it's going to be a theme, you will then get the theme specified after that phrase. So now we come on to the events, and as I said earlier, at the basic level this just means what happens in the extract or what is described in the extract. However, the events are important because the order of events and the way they relate to each other provides the structure for the extract. So you should always look at how the events are related to one another. And the events in the text are often the vehicle through which the writer presents and explores their themes and ideas. So they have things happening or characters acting in particular ways that relate to the theme that they are trying to address in their particular text. The events, as we said, were like the settings, will often have a deeper significance than it first appears. So characters will do certain things or certain things will happen, and those things will be symbolic. They will be symbolic acts as well as literal acts. The events are therefore generally very closely related to the settings, and it's the combination of the setting, so the location or the time of day or the time of the year, and what's actually happening that gives the events their deeper meaning. So when and where the events take place gives them that symbolism, and you need to pay attention to that. So you can see how these elements of sight are starting to connect with each other. So the setting is symbolic in itself, but then you have the events taking place within a particular setting that is symbolic, and that is symbolic of the writer's ideas and perspectives, which is related to the theme that the writer is addressing in that particular text. So using sight then. Sight focuses us on the big things in a text. When we are using sight, what we're doing is identifying and examining the 4 elements that make up a text, and therefore it's a really useful way into a text. It's a useful way to unlock a text, because when we're examining sight, we are always looking at the text as a whole, and it allows us to start to understand and to engage with what is going on in a text, and to consider why those things are happening and what the writer is trying to say to us through their presentation of those things. As you've seen, all 4 elements of sight are interconnected, and to be able to write insightfully about the one that is specified in question 4, you need to consider the other 3 elements of that acronym sight. So if we go back now to that extract from Tess the D'Urbervilles and we think about these elements, we have themes, we have the ideas, and we have the events, and look at what those are. So let's begin with the ideas. So the ideas we're dealing with are those of Thomas Hardy, the writer himself, and within this extract he's dealing with this idea of society destroying innocence and purity. He's exploring and challenging the morals and the prevailing attitudes of the day that lead to Tess having to be executed because she's killed a man that has sexually assaulted her. And within that there's also this key Hardy idea of fatalism or determinism, this idea that our path and our life is already determined for us and there's nothing we can do. We are helpless victims of fate. Our fate is predetermined for us, and Tess sort of eventually she kind of accepts this in her acceptance of going away with the police and ultimately going to her death. Throughout this extract, Hardy is questioning and rejecting conventional religious belief. We see Angel Clare being unable to answer Tess when she asks whether they're going to meet again after they're dead, because he is representative of that kind of questioning and that loss of faith that was taking place at this time. So he stands for Hardy, and he's used to further this idea that conventional religion is not necessarily relevant, partly because of the scientific developments. People are beginning to understand that there is, or believe that there is no afterlife, you don't meet after death, and that sort of thing. When we come on to the themes, there are a number of key themes in this very short extract that Hardy addresses again and again throughout Tess of the D'Urbervilles and his other prose fiction. So we have this idea of sacrifice. We said at the beginning that the setting of Stonehenge is significant because they used to sacrifice, do human sacrifices to the sun there, and Tess is seen very much as this innocent sacrificial victim. As I said a moment ago, there's this idea of fatalism. This is a key theme running throughout all of Hardy's prose fiction, actually, during the 19th century, the idea that your fate is predetermined. There's the idea of innocence. What do we mean by innocent? Well, by the standards of Victorian society, Tess cannot be considered innocent because she has given birth to an illegitimate child. She has lived in sin with the father of that child, and she has then murdered him. However, Hardy consistently presents her as an innocent. She is a pure woman, which is the subtitle of this text. So he's questioning and challenging conventional morals and conventional attitudes. There's this theme of justice. So Tess is raped by Alec d'Urberville and she bears his child. He is never prosecuted for that. He is never punished for that. She is the one that pays the price. However, at the end of the novel, justice is seen to be served because Tess is executed for killing Alec. But what Hardy's questioning is whether that is true justice or not, because actually, should she have been hung? She was a victim. So maybe justice is a movable concept, and it's not quite as straightforward as it might seem. And again, challenging the morals and the laws of the day. And then, of course, there is this theme of love, this idea that love endures. What is love? Eventually, Angel Clare comes back to her. He accepts her. He accepts the fact that she had this illegitimate child. He also accepts the fact that she's killed Alec, and he tries to help her and do the best for her. And she is in love with Angel. He is the love of her life, and she wants to meet after death. So how does this all play out in the events? Well, At the beginning of the extract that you have, there is this conversation about sacrifice, about sacrificing to God or sacrificing to the sun. That then leads into a more detailed conversation about the afterlife and whether that exists. And we see there that kind of crisis of faith that Angel Clare has. He cannot and will not answer her because he just does not believe it. She wants to believe it and she wants to take comfort in it. So she's sort of clinging to this old-fashioned idea that there is an afterlife and there is a heaven. Tess then falls asleep on the stone after this event, and as such she looks like a sacrificial victim. When the police arrive, they gather round her and they watch her as she sleeps. So you've got all these men watching this small, frail woman in a very vulnerable position because she's asleep. She's the only female figure in that landscape. You've got all the men. The monoliths of Stonehenge are very male, very masculine and very strong. She is this kind of fragile thing that is being destroyed by all of this masculinity. Angel realises that Tess has killed Alec, but he doesn't reject her. He tries to protect her, and that's where that theme of love comes in. The sun rises over Stonehenge and it shines on Tess. It's almost like the light of God showing her as being innocent, showing her as being righteous, that kind of phrase. But it's also the sun that the pagans sacrificed to her. And it is at that point that the police arrest Tess. She goes calmly and quietly with them at sunrise. She is effectively a willing sacrificial victim. But not to the sun. She is a victim of and a sacrifice to masculinity and the male rules that say that a woman cannot behave like Tess has done. That is unacceptable. So let's look now in detail at the text itself and see where we could find evidence to back up this particular interpretation of this extract. Okay, so if we apply sight to this extract from Tess of the D'Urbervilles, this extract that comes from near the end of the novel where she's finally killed Alec d'Urberville, she's fled with her lawful husband, Angel Clare, and they've ended up in Stonehenge. We've already said that the setting itself is significant, so let's look at how that is significant and what sort of ideas are being conveyed to us, how Hardy is using the setting, the events, to convey his own ideas through this extract. So the first thing that happens is that we listen to this conversation between Tess and Angel, where Tess asks Angel whether people made sacrifices at Stonehenge and whether they sacrificed to God. And it's significant, his response is significant because he tells us that no, actually they sacrificed to the sun, because obviously it was pagan. So straight away you've got this sort of this different belief system. You're going from Tess's complete belief in Christianity and Christian teaching to pagan worship that used to happen at Stonehenge. That then leads into a longer conversation between Tess and Angel about the afterlife, because Tess, all the way through the novel, she's been bound by the conventions and the rules of Christian patriarchal society that she lives in, and that has dictated her view of herself. So when she ended up becoming pregnant as a result of the assault by Alec d'Urberville, she felt that that was her fault. She felt that she was a ruined maid, that she was somehow to blame for that. And then when the baby eventually died, she believed that the death of that baby was a judgment on her, a judgment from God, that the baby was killed essentially by God because it was illegitimate, it should never have been born in the first place. She was responsible for what had happened, and so God takes that child away. And now at the end, she knows that she's going to be executed. There's this sense of fatalism and inevitability. But she says to Angel, "Tell me now, Angel, do you think we shall meet again after we are dead? I want to know." He kissed her to avoid a reply at such a time. So she's accepting the fact that she's going to die, but she has this little glimmer of hope that comes from the Christian belief that she has, that they are going to meet again in the afterlife. But Angel doesn't reply. "Oh, Angel, I fear that means no," she says with she said with a suppressed sob, and I wanted so to see you again, so much, so much. What, not even you and I, Angel, who love each other so well? And of course Angel Clare, who's had this crisis of belief earlier in the novel, he's rejected this Christian belief already, and so like a greater than himself, to the critical question at the critical time, he did not answer. He knows that that is not going to happen. He's very much the kind of the modern Hardy-esque figure in here who questions and doesn't now believe that Christian sense of the afterlife and of redemption. So when Tess dies, there is no redemption. She isn't going to go to heaven, but he can't bring himself to say that to her. Tess then falls asleep. She falls asleep on one of the big slabs, and because they've been talking about sacrifice, that's planted this idea in the reader's mind. And so when she lays down and sleeps on this slab, we see her as a sacrificial victim, and that sense is heightened when the police arrive, because they don't arrest her straight away. Angel asks them to let her sleep, and they all gather round and watch her sleeping. They wait until she wakes up naturally, and they then become almost like the pagan high priests that are then going to sacrifice her. And it is significant that they are all men. She is the only female in this situation. She's the only woman, and she's described as being very, very frail, very fragile, very small, almost infantilized. And these men, these powerful men, stand around watching her, and they're ultimately going to take her away and sacrifice her to, you know, the morals of the day. And this is Hardy coming through. So let's look at what he's doing here. Well, what he's saying, the way he presents this scene, he views this situation as being unjust. Tess has killed Alex. She is a murderer. She has done something terrible, but Alec is never punished in law for what he did to Tess. She is the one that pays the price. So Hardy is deliberately presenting Tess as an innocent victim, which is really quite a challenging idea for the readers at the time, to see a woman who has, you know, given birth to an illegitimate child, who's then lived in sin with the man who is the father of that child, and then who has ultimately murdered that man. That's quite a big leap for them to go along with the fact that she is innocent and that she is pure, but Hardy maintains that. He's suggesting that she is being sacrificed to the social and the moral rules, of the misguided social and moral rules of Victorian society, that allow a man to take advantage or possibly even rape a young girl and get away with it. But that young girl then pays the price in so many different ways. And as I said, it's significant that all these men gather around watching her. He writes with this sense of pathos. There's this sense of inevitability. Tess has already accepted that she is going to die. She knows that she's going to be executed for the crime that she's committed. Okay, and as a reader, we feel that immense sense of sympathy and empathy with her, but we know that we can't do anything to change that, and she can't do anything to change that, and that's deliberate. It's a technique called pathos, and Hardy uses that technique to make the reader challenge in their own mind the prevailing moral attitude of the day towards women and towards the way that men sort of use and abuse their power in a society that is dominated by men. Despite everything that she has done, Hardy is still presenting Tess as innocent and pure. The subtitle of this novel is A Pure Woman, and he maintains that right until the very end. She becomes almost a kind of martyred, saint-like figure, like some of the things you might see in stained glass windows and in Christian religion. And he says that, you know, he believes, you can see through his presentation of her and what happens to her, that she is very much the victim. If we go on and look at the end of the extract that you have, we were talking about the number of police that arrive, and Tess is described as being very small and very frail, and yet there are all these men. So if you look at the beginning, turning, so Angel Clare, saw over the prostrate columns another figure. Another was at hand on the right, under a trilithron, and another on the left. the dawn shone full on the front of the man westward, and the policeman says there are 16 of us on the plain and the whole country is reared. So for this one young woman, they've brought out the police in force and the country is all looking for her. It's like she's this dangerous criminal, but she really isn't. Angel asks them to wait until she's finished sleeping, and again this increases that sense of pathos because she sleeps on the sleep of the innocent. She's completely unaware that they've arrived, and it's almost like she becomes a child again. She becomes this innocent, and throughout the novel he refers to the fact that when you look at Tess in certain lights you can see the 5-year-old Tess and the 16-year-old Tess and the, you know, so all of her being, all of her different versions of herself are there. Angel knows he can do nothing to prevent this arrest. He just asks them to wait until she wakes up. They do wait, and it is significant, as I said, because they wait for the sun to rise. So she, if you think back to that conversation at the beginning of this extract, they were talking about sacrifices, and Angel told her no, they sacrifice to the sun. So the police wait until dawn, they wait till the sun rises to take her away, to essentially sacrifice her. And because he's already planted that idea in the reader's mind, we're aware of that and we pick up on that, the idea that she is being sacrificed, she is kind of a sun sacrifice to this kind of pagan idea. So the ray of sun that shines on her, we've got this mixing of paganism and Christianity. It's almost like the light of God. So this phrase, the sun shines on the righteous, in Christianity, is this idea that Tess is righteous. Okay, she's killed Alec, but you know what? He blooming well deserved it for what he did. But at the same time, it's also the sun that rises over pagan sun sacrifices. So you've got that mixing of paganism and Christianity in this extract. She remains calm. She puts up no resistance. She's kind of accepted her fate, and it's this idea of sort of determinism, that your fate is set out for you and there's very little that you can do to change that. The path that we go on is all predetermined. That's a big idea in Hardy, in all of his novels in fact, and he's expressing that through this particular episode. So Tess has suffered all of her life because of the abuse of male power, because of the whims of men. So, you know, her father is a drunkard. She has to live in poverty because he can't hold down a job, because he's a bit feckless. She then is assaulted by Alec d'Urberville. He bears his illegitimate child. She's rejected by society. She then meets and marries Angel Clare, but when she confesses to him, he rejects her, and then she has to find her own way, and then ultimately she's going to be executed for the murder that she's committed. And in a sense, justice has been served because she's going to be executed, but what justice is there for her? That's the question that Hardy is asking. He's presenting this as happening as it should, in terms of the rules, the laws of the day, but there is the sense that this is unjust, that this just isn't fair, and that there is a problem with the way that society treats women like Tess. Okay, so we've looked at the extract from Tess of the D'Urbervilles. Let's look now at some do's and some don'ts when using sight to answer the evaluative question, question 4 on paper 1. So let's begin with the do's. The first thing you must do is to read the question very carefully and identify the particular aspect of sight that you are being asked to evaluate on. The element of sight will always be specified after the phrase "there is an attempt to show," and I would suggest that you highlight whatever comes after that phrase so that you know what you're writing about. Having identified it, before you go and look for any evidence in the text, just take a moment to decide how well you personally feel that particular aspect of sight has been conveyed to you throughout the text that you're dealing with. You are then going to need to use inference to evaluate and explain the effects that that aspect of sight has across the text as a whole. You must, for question 4, deal with the text as a whole. and you need to obviously consider the other three elements of sight. So if we're thinking about ideas, you're going to have to infer and to interpret. It's not going to be there on the page for you. You've got to work that out. You've got to think deeply about the symbolism of what you're reading in terms of the settings, the events, the themes, and how they relate to the writer's own ideas. All of the comments that you provide in response to question 4 should always be explaining how the writer is presenting the aspect of sight and why it is being used in terms of the ideas and the themes that the writer is trying to address. And you must support what you are saying either by paraphrasing, as I was doing in the analysis of that extract from Tess of the D'Urbervilles, or by quoting directly. And ideally you'd have a mix of paraphrasing and quoting. Okay, so let's go on to the don't. So when you're answering question 4, when you're evaluating, do not zoom in and analyse any specific aspects of language or structure. Okay, hopefully you noticed when I was talking about that extract, although I was identifying and commenting on particular bits of the text, I wasn't talking about things like the verb choices or the noun phrases or semantic fields or anything like that. I was talking in general terms, and I was using the particular bits of the text to illustrate what I was saying rather than analysing them. You must not discuss the connotations of particular words within the quotes that you're using. You will, however, be discussing the connotations of the text as a whole in terms of sight, and you must not simply describe or identify the aspect of sight. You must explain the effect, the how and the why the aspect has on the meaning of the text as a whole and the reader's response to that text as a whole. Okay, you won't get very much credit if you just say, well, this happens and this happens and this happens, and that's all set against the backdrop of Stonehenge, which makes this a really interesting and engaging extract. That will get you very few marks. You need to explain, as I was doing in that analysis, why the settings, the themes, the events are significant and how they show us the writer's ideas and perspectives. So, commenting on sight, using sight to comment on 19th century text. When you first read a text, sight is really useful. It's a really good idea to look at the setting, to look at the themes, to look at the events. So if you start with the events, they're the easiest, almost working your way backwards. Look at the events, what is happening in that text, then look at the setting. Where are those events taking place? What time of year? What time of day? Then think about what themes appear to being addressed in there, and then you can start to use inference to decide what the writer feels about what they're writing about. What are the ideas that the writer is trying to present to us? You will need to evaluate a specific aspect of sight in response to question 4. That aspect will be specified in the question, but you are going to need to deal with the other 3 aspects as well. When you're commenting on sight, you have to deal with the text as a whole. You have to deal with the text in overview. You're taking a broad view of the text. So, just to recap then, sight stands for settings, when and where things happen in the text, ideas, the writer's ideas, what they think or what they believe, the themes, the significant issues being explored or the message that's being conveyed, and the events, the things that happen within the text or are described within the text. That is what sight stands for. So sight then is a really useful way of unlocking these 19th century texts, and it is the thing that you need to focus on when you are evaluating in response to question 4.